Someone is standing on an unfamiliar street corner, holding a phone with the screen lit up. Within seconds, a blue dot appears on a map, and that dot moves. It follows the exact street the person is walking down, turning when they turn, advancing when they advance. No questions asked, no calculations required, no hesitation. Knowing where you are stopped being a hard-won achievement and became as automatic as breathing. But that effortlessness hides a long, complicated story full of wrong turns. A story that began long before satellites, before printed maps, before anyone had the words to describe precisely where one continent ended and an ocean began. For most of human history, finding your way meant learning to read the sky. The stars served as a fixed reference system. The Big Dipper, the Southern Cross, the North Star pointing steadily northward with a consistency no human-made instrument could match. Peoples who lived near the sea developed an intimate relationship with winds, currents, and cloud formations. Polynesian navigators crossed the Pacific more than 3,000 years ago by reading the movement of waves beneath their hulls, the flight patterns of birds, and constellations they had memorized since childhood. It was knowledge written into the body, passed down through generations. It worked, but it depended on ideal conditions: clear skies, familiar waters, accumulated experience. When any of those variables disappeared, disorientation could be fatal. The compass changed that equation quietly and profoundly. No one knows exactly when the Chinese discovered that a magnetized iron needle always points north, but the oldest records of its nautical use date to the 11th century. The idea took time to reach Europe, likely traveling through trade routes connecting the Islamic world to the Mediterranean. By the 13th century, European sailors were already using a rudimentary version of the instrument. The compass did not tell you where you were, but it told you which direction you were heading. That was an enormous difference. With a needle pointing north, a ship could hold its course through the night, through cloud cover, through conditions that would have left earlier sailors lost. Navigation no longer depended entirely on the weather. But knowing your direction was not enough. To move with intention, to plan a route, to communicate to another person where you had been or where you wanted to go, the world needed to be represented somehow. Maps have existed for thousands of years. Babylonian clay tablets show rivers and cities. Rock carvings from various cultures depict territories as seen from above. But cartography as a systematic discipline took shape with the Greeks. Eratosthenes, in the 3rd century BCE, calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy using nothing but shadows, angles, and the distance between two Egyptian cities. Ptolemy, 4 centuries later, compiled geographic coordinates for thousands of known locations and established the idea of representing the world on a grid of latitude and longitude. His maps were full of errors, but the conceptual framework was sound. The world could be measured and represented. The problem was that measuring latitude, the distance north or south of the equator, was relatively straightforward. You simply observed how high the sun or stars sat above the horizon. Longitude, your position east or west, was another matter entirely. The Earth rotates, the sky shifts, and there is no fixed point overhead that indicates how far you have traveled in either direction. For centuries, that problem was the greatest obstacle in ocean navigation. European ships crossing the Atlantic after the 15th century could determine their north-south position with reasonable accuracy, but their east-west location was an estimate built on speed, elapsed time, and compass heading. This method, known as dead reckoning, accumulated errors with every mile sailed. Ships that believed themselves safely offshore ran aground on hidden rocks. Entire expeditions were lost to calculation errors that would be unthinkable today. The solution came from an unexpected direction: time. If you could know exactly what time it was at a fixed reference point and compare that to local time determined by the position of the sun, the difference between those two readings would reveal your longitude. Every hour of difference corresponds to 15 degrees of separation on the globe. The logic was clear. The obstacle was building a clock that could keep accurate time at sea, through salt air, fluctuating temperatures, and the constant motion of a ship. The mechanical clocks of the era simply could not hold up under those conditions. The British government, fully aware of the lives and fortunes being lost to this problem, offered an extraordinary prize in 1714 to whoever could solve it. A self-taught carpenter named John Harrison spent decades of his life building increasingly precise chronometers, fighting the resistance and skepticism of the scientific establishment every step of the way. His fourth instrument, tested in 1761, kept time to within seconds after weeks at sea. The longitude problem, which had tormented navigators for centuries, was solved by a clock in a box. The combination of compass, precise maps, and marine chronometer transformed ocean navigation. The 18th and 19th centuries brought intense cartographic exploration. Coastlines that had appeared distorted on earlier maps were measured accurately. Islands were placed in their correct positions. Ocean currents and seafloor features were recorded. The world became readable. But even with all that progress, navigating still required specialized instruments, technical knowledge, and acceptable visibility. A sailor could calculate his position, but the process took time and depended on clear skies to observe the stars. On land, finding your way through unfamiliar territory remained a challenge for most people. The radical change came from space. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth. Two physicists at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, listening to Sputnik's radio signals, noticed something. The frequency of those signals shifted depending on where the satellite was relative to their position on the ground. It was the Doppler effect applied to an orbiting object. And if they could determine the satellite's position by knowing their own location, they could reverse the logic, determine their own location by knowing the satellite's position. That inverted reasoning became the seed of something entirely new. The United States military developed the first satellite positioning systems through the 1960s and 1970s. The project that eventually became GPS, the Global Positioning System, began taking shape in the early 70s under the Department of Defense. The concept was ambitious: a constellation of satellites distributed in medium Earth orbit, arranged so that at any point on the planet, at any moment, a receiver on the ground could pick up signals from at least 4 of them simultaneously. Each satellite continuously broadcasts the precise time from its atomic clock, along with its position in space. A receiver on the ground listens to those signals, calculates how long each one took to arrive, and uses that information to determine its distance from each satellite. With 4 simultaneous signals, a 3-dimensional position can be fixed to within a few meters. The system became operational for military use in the 1980s. In 1983, after a Korean civilian airliner was shot down over Soviet airspace due to a navigation error, President Ronald Reagan announced that GPS would be made available for civilian use once the system was complete. The full constellation went operational in 1995. For years, GPS was a precision tool that required large, expensive, specialized receivers. Luxury cars began incorporating it in the 1990s. Portable devices followed, bulky and costly for the average person. What changed everything was the convergence of multiple technologies into a single object people already carried with them. The mobile phone stopped being just a communication device in the mid-2000s, when manufacturers like Apple and Google committed to integrating sensors, cameras, and internet connectivity into a single platform. The iPhone arrived in 2007 with a built-in GPS receiver. Android followed the same path. Within a few years, billions of people were carrying GPS receivers in their pockets, connected to digital maps updated in real time, capable of calculating routes, anticipating traffic, and guiding anyone turn by turn to any point on the planet. What took centuries to build was compressed into a screen the size of a hand. The compass that guided medieval sailors, the chronometers Harrison spent decades refining, the satellites orbiting 20,000 kilometers overhead, the algorithms that translate radio signals into coordinates, the fiber optic networks that deliver the maps, all of it operates simultaneously, invisibly, every time that blue dot appears on a screen. The person standing on the unfamiliar street corner does not need to know any of this to reach their destination. But behind that comfortable ignorance lies an extraordinary chain of curiosity, obsession, failure, and correction that stretched across millennia. Getting lost, in a way, was exactly what taught us never to be lost again.